Welcome to our Viking Tales channel. If you're ready for an epic journey through Norse legends, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Smash that like button if you're excited for this incredible story, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from around the world. Now let's dive into today's tale. Nobody dared believe until the baby dragon came back to repay his Viking father's sacrifice. The North Sea raged with unprecedented fury that autumn night, its waves towering like ancient mountains before crashing down upon the rocky shores of Nordfjord. Lightning split the black sky in jagged scars, illuminating the small fishing village where Viking families huddled in their longhouses, praying to the gods for safe passage through the storm. Tormund Ironbeard stood at the edge of the cliff, overlooking the treacherous waters, his weathered hands gripping his battle-axe as he watched his youngest son's fishing boat disappear behind walls of churning foam. The wind howled through his braided beard, carrying with it the salt spray and the desperate cries of seabirds seeking shelter. His pale blue eyes, hardened by decades of raids and warfare, now reflected a father's deepest fear. "Father, you must come inside," shouted his eldest daughter, Astrid, her voice barely audible above the storm's roar. She struggled against the wind, her long blonde hair whipping around her face like golden serpents. "The Norns have already decided Eric's fate. Standing here won't change it." But Tormund remained unmoved, his massive frame carved from years of wielding hammer and sword. At 45 winters old, he had survived countless battles, lost brothers to Saxon blades, and watched friends fall to disease and age. Yet nothing had prepared him for the helpless agony of watching his 17-year-old son vanish into the storm's maw. The village behind them had fallen silent, except for the rhythmic pounding of waves against stone. Smoke rose from scattered chimneys, quickly dispersed by the wind, while yellow light flickered through small windows where families waited for dawn. The longships pulled high onto the beach, groaned against their moorings, their carved dragon heads seeming to watch the horizon with wooden eyes. Hours passed like entire seasons. Tormund's legs trembled with cold and exhaustion, but still he stood vigil. Astrid had long since returned to the warmth of their hall, where her mother, Ingrid, prepared hot mead and worried herself into sleeplessness. The storm showed no signs of weakening. If anything, it seemed to grow more violent as the night deepened. Then, just as the first pale hints of dawn touched the eastern horizon, Tormund saw something impossible emerging from the chaos of wind and wave. A small boat, riding impossibly high on a massive swell, carried by currents that should have dashed it to pieces against the rocks. As it drew closer, he could make out a figure hunched over the oars. His son Eric, alive but struggling against exhaustion. Tormund's heart hammered against his ribs as he scrambled down the treacherous cliff path, his boots slipping on wet stone. Behind Eric's boat, something else moved through the water, something massive and serpentine that seemed to guide the small vessel toward shore. In the growing light, Tormund caught glimpses of scales that shimmered like polished bronze, and eyes that glowed with an intelligence older than the mountains. The boat ground against the pebbled beach with a sound like grinding bones. Eric collapsed forward over his oars, his dark hair plastered to his skull, his tunic torn and stained with salt. But in his arms, wrapped carefully in his fishing net, lay something that made Tormund's blood freeze in his veins. A dragon hatchling, no larger than a newborn lamb, its scales the color of fresh blood and burnished gold. Its tiny chest rose and fell with labored breathing, and one of its delicate wings hung at an unnatural angle. The creature's eyes, ancient beyond its apparent youth, fixed on Tormund with a gaze that seemed to pierce straight through to his soul. "Father?" Eric gasped, his voice hoarse from shouting over the storm. "I found it floating on a piece of driftwood. It was dying. I couldn't leave it." Tormund knelt beside his son, his warrior's instincts warring with paternal relief. Dragons were creatures of legend, beings of immense power that had vanished from the world generations ago. To find one, especially a youngling, was either the greatest blessing or the most terrible curse the gods could bestow. The hatchling stirred in Eric's arms, letting out a sound somewhere between a kitten's mew and a hawk's cry. Its injured wing twitched, and Tormund saw the bone was clearly broken. Without treatment, the creature would certainly die. "Bring it to the house," Tormund commanded, lifting his exhausted son to his feet. "Quickly, before the village wakes. Your mother has healing knowledge." As they climbed the cliff path, Tormund glanced back at the sea. The massive form he had glimpsed was gone, leaving only the eternal dance of wave and wind. But he felt eyes watching them from the depths, ancient and patient, waiting to see what choice they would make. In the warmth of their longhouse, Ingrid gasped when she saw what her son carried. Her healing instincts overcame her fear, and soon she was examining the dragon's injuries with the same careful attention she gave to wounded warriors. The hatchling submitted to her touch with surprising docility, as if it understood their intent to help. "The wing can be mended," she pronounced after a thorough examination, "but it will take time and care. This little one is far from its mother, far from its own kind." Eric looked up at his father with pleading eyes. "We can't abandon it now. It saved my life out there. I know it sounds impossible, but I swear by Thor's hammer, it guided me home through the storm." Tormund studied the tiny dragon, remembering the massive shape in the water. Perhaps this creature's parent had sacrificed something precious to ensure their child's rescue. Perhaps the gods were testing their honor. "We will care for it," he decided, "but this must remain secret. If word spreads to other villages, to the jarls and kings, they will come for the dragon. Some will want to slay it for glory, others to capture it for power." And so began the strangest winter of Tormund's life. They named the dragon Ember for the way its scales caught and reflected firelight. Ingrid set its wing with splints carved from whalebone, while Eirik fed it fish and scraps of meat. The creature grew with supernatural speed, its intelligence becoming more apparent each day. Ember learned to understand their words, responding to its name and simple commands. It would curl up by the fire like a large cat, purring with a sound like distant thunder. When storms threatened, it would become restless, pacing the length of their hall with obvious anxiety. The village children sometimes glimpsed strange shadows moving behind the windows of Tormund's house, but adults dismissed their wild tales as products of imagination. Only Astrid knew the full truth, sworn to secrecy and helping to care for their unusual guest. As winter deepened and snow blanketed the village, Ember's wing healed completely. The dragon had grown to the size of a large dog, its scales now gleaming like precious metals. But with its recovery came a new restlessness, a longing that seemed to pull it toward the sea. One morning, Tormund woke to find Ember standing at the door, looking back at the family with eyes full of ancient sadness. The dragon understood, as they all did, that the time for parting had come. "You must return to your own kind," Tormund said softly, kneeling to stroke the creature's magnificent head. "But know that you will always have a place in this house, little one." Ember pressed its snout against Tormund's weathered palm, a gesture of gratitude and farewell. Then it spread its wings, now perfect and strong, and launched itself into the grey morning sky. The family watched from their doorway as the dragon circled once overhead before flying toward the distant horizon, where sea met sky in an endless embrace. A spring arrived and the fishing season began anew. Life in Nordfjord returned to its ancient rhythms. But Tormund often found himself scanning the skies and searching the waters, wondering if he would ever see Ember again. 7 years passed like scattered leaves on autumn wind. Eric had grown into a man, his shoulders broad as his father's, his beard thick and red gold like burnished copper. He had earned his place among the village's fiercest warriors, leading successful raids against Saxon coastal settlements and returning with enough silver to buy his own longship. Tormund's hair had turned completely grey, though his arm remained strong and his axe swift. Astrid had married a jarl's son from a neighbouring fjord, while Ingrid's healing wisdom had become legendary throughout the region. The memory of their dragon had faded into something that felt almost like a shared dream. But the North remembers everything, and debts of honor echo through generations like songs passed from father to son. The crisis began with the arrival of King Harold Bluetooth's messenger, a thin man with nervous eyes who delivered news that struck fear into every heart in Nordfjord. A great dragon had awakened in the mountains to the east, not a hatchling this time, but an ancient worm of immense size and terrible power. It had already destroyed 3 villages, its flames turning entire settlements to ash and bone. "The king commands every able warrior to join his army," the messenger announced in the village square, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "This beast threatens all of Denmark. We march at the next new moon." Murmurs of fear and excitement rippled through the villages. Dragons had been absent from the world for so long that many had begun to think them mere legends. Now reality crashed down like a falling mountain, reminding them that some legends were all too real. That evening, as Tormund sharpened his battle-axe by the fire, Eirik sat beside him with a troubled expression. "Father, what if this dragon is connected to Ember somehow? What if by saving one, we've brought doom upon ourselves? The gods work in ways beyond our understanding," Tormund replied, testing his blade's edge with a careful thumb. "We acted with honor when we helped that hatchling. Whatever comes now, we face it with the same honor." 3 days later, the warriors of Nordfjord joined the growing army that King Harold had assembled. Men came from every corner of the realm, grizzled veterans with scars like road maps across their bodies, young fighters eager to prove their worth, and jarls whose names were known in every mead hall from Norway to the Baltic Sea. The dragon's lair lay deep in the Jotunheim Mountains, where ancient glaciers carved valleys between peaks that scraped the belly of the sky. The army made camp in a valley below the monster's cave, the men building great fires to ward off the supernatural cold that seemed to flow down from the heights like invisible water. Tormund studied the dragon's lair through the gathering dusk. The cave mouth yawned like a wound in the mountainside, large enough to swallow a long-ship whole. Scattered around its entrance lay the bones of various creatures, deer, elk, and disturbingly, what looked like human remains. The rocks around the cave were scorched black, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with residual heat. King Harold himself stood at the center of the camp, a giant of a man whose reputation had spread across every Viking realm. His war council included the most famous warriors of the age, Eric Bloodaxe's son, Olaf the White, and the legendary berserker known only as Iron Wolf. "We attack at dawn," Harold announced to his gathered commanders. "The beast is largest and strongest, but it's also old and slow. We'll form a shield wall at the cave mouth, force it to fight on ground of our choosing." But Tormund felt unease settling in his stomach like bad meat. Something about this situation seemed wrong, though he couldn't identify what troubled him. The dragon's behavior, destroying villages seemingly at random, didn't match the patterns described in the old stories his grandfather had told him. That night, as the army settled into restless sleep, Tormund walked the perimeter of the camp. The stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, but the normal sounds of night creatures were absent. Even the wind seemed hushed, as if the mountains themselves held their breath. Then he heard it, a sound like distant thunder, but rhythmic and purposeful. Wing beats, massive and approaching fast. "Dragon!" someone screamed from the other side of camp. "The beast comes!" Warriors erupted from their bedrolls, scrambling for weapons and shields as a shadow blotted out the stars. But instead of attacking, the creature landed at the edge of the firelight with surprising grace. And in that moment, Tormund's heart nearly stopped. The dragon was magnificent beyond description, its scales a deep bronze green that reflected the firelight like polished armor. Its head was noble and intelligent, with eyes like molten gold that surveyed the army with obvious intelligence. But most shocking of all was the smaller dragon that perched on its back, red and gold scales gleaming, familiar eyes finding Tormund's across the chaos of the camp. Ember had returned, but now it was no longer a hatchling. It had grown to the size of a young horse, its wings strong and its presence commanding. And it had brought its parent. The great dragon lowered its massive head and spoke, its voice like the rumble of distant avalanches. "I am Solarith, mother of the one you call Ember. I have come to honor a debt." The entire army stood frozen in shock. Dragons were intelligent. This much was known from the old stories, but to hear one speak in their own tongue was a marvel beyond imagination. King Harold himself stepped forward, his hand on his sword hilt, but his eyes wide with amazement. "What debt do you speak of, Ancient One?" Harold called out, his voice steady despite the circumstances. Solarith's golden eyes found Tormund in the crowd, and the great dragon's head turned toward him like a mountain choosing to move. 7 winters ago, warriors of Nordfjord saved my child when storm and injury threatened its life. They showed mercy when they could have chosen glory. Now I offer the same mercy to them." Ember leapt down from its mother's back and padded across the camp toward Tormund, ignoring the weapons pointed in its direction. The dragon that had once been small enough to hold in 2 hands now stood tall enough to look Tormund in the eye. "My friend," Ember spoke, its voice like music played on bronze bells. "You and your family gave me life when I had none. Now I would return that gift." Tormund found his voice despite the wonder that threatened to overwhelm him. "What gift would you offer, young one?" "Truth," Solarith answered before her child could speak. "The dragon that destroys villages in the east is not one of us. It is Nidhogger's spawn, a creature of malice and chaos that feeds on suffering. Your weapons cannot harm it, your shields cannot protect you. To face it is to march toward certain death." Murmurs of fear rippled through the army. Nidhogger was a name from the oldest stories, the dragon that gnawed at the roots of Yggdrasil itself, the World Tree. If this beast was truly such a creature's offspring, then no mortal army could stand against it. King Harold stepped closer to the great dragons, his face grim but determined. "If our weapons cannot harm this monster, how can it be stopped?" "It cannot be destroyed," Solarith replied, "but it can be driven back to the depths where it belongs. This requires dragon fire, dragon strength, and dragon wisdom. I offer my aid, not for your king or your glory, but to honor the debt I owe to those who showed kindness to my child." The camp erupted in excited conversation. To have an ally such as this, a dragon fighting alongside them instead of against them, was beyond any warrior's wildest dreams. But Tormund felt ice forming in his veins as he began to understand the true cost of what Solarith proposed. "What do you require of us?" he asked, dreading the answer. Ember moved closer, its eyes sad but resolute. "A guide who knows these mountains. Someone brave enough to ride upon my mother's back and show her the way to the beast's true lair. Someone who can be trusted with the greatest secret of our kind." The weight of destiny settled on Tormund's shoulders like a cloak made of lead. He was nearly 52 winters old. His fighting days should have been behind him. But honor demanded payment, and debts of the heart could not be ignored. "I will go," he said simply. "Father, no!" Eric pushed through the crowd, his face pale with terror. "Let me take your place. I'm younger, stronger." But Solarith shook her massive head. "The debt is specific, young warrior. Your father saved my child, so your father must ride with us. This is the way of things." The next morning, as the army broke camp to return home, Tormund stood beside the great dragon and prepared for a journey unlike any in human memory. Solarith had fashioned a harness of sorts from her own shed scales, creating a seat behind her massive neck, where a rider could hold on securely. Eric embraced his father, with tears in his eyes. "Come back to us, old man. The village needs its greatest warrior." "The village has its greatest warrior," Tormund replied, gripping his son's shoulders. "You've grown beyond what I ever dreamed possible. Lead them well." As Solarith spread her enormous wings and launched herself into the sky, Tormund felt his stomach drop toward the earth far below. The sensation of flight was indescribable, a mixture of terror and wonder that seemed to strip away everything he thought he knew about the world. They flew eastward into the rising sun, Ember keeping pace beside them with powerful wing beats. Below, the landscape unfolded like a vast map drawn by the gods themselves. Forests gave way to tundra, tundra to glacier-carved valleys, valleys to peaks that pierced the sky like the spears of giants. After hours of flight, they reached a region where the very air seemed tainted with malice. The trees below were withered and black, the rivers ran red with unnatural corruption, and the rocks themselves seemed to weep tears of poisonous sludge. "There!" Solareth rumbled, her voice vibrating through Tormund's bones. "The spawn of Nidhögr has claimed this valley as its own. Now we must drive it back to the darkness where it belongs." And the battle that followed would be remembered in songs for 1,000 generations. Solareth and the corrupt dragon met in the sky above the poisoned valley, their clash shaking the mountains themselves. Fire met fire in explosions that turned night to day, while Tormund held on desperately and tried not to think about the impossible distance to the ground below. Ember darted and weaved around the combatants, using speed and agility to harass the enemy, while its mother dealt devastating blows with claws like sword blades and teeth like spear points. The corrupt dragon was larger and older, but it fought with mindless fury, while Solareth used strategy and intelligence to gradually wear down her opponent. When the enemy dragon finally retreated, diving into a chasm that seemed to lead straight to the underworld itself, Tormund felt as if he had aged another 20 years in a single day. They had won, but the cost was clear in the exhaustion that radiated from both dragons. "It is done," Solareth announced, as they landed beside a clean mountain stream. "The spawn will not trouble your people again for many generations." That evening, as they rested beside a fire that Ember had kindled with its breath, Tormund asked the question that had been burning in his mind all day. "Why did you really come back? The debt could have been considered paid simply by warning us of the danger." Ember curled up beside the fire, its scales reflecting the dancing flames. "Because you showed me what family means, what loyalty and sacrifice look like. When I returned to my own kind, I carried those lessons with me. Some gifts can only be repaid by passing them forward." 3 days later, Solareth delivered Tormund safely back to Nordfjord, where the entire village gathered on the beach to witness the return of their hero. As the great dragon prepared to depart forever, she spoke words that would be carved in stone and remembered for all time. "Let it be known that the people of this place have earned the friendship of dragonkind. Should you ever face peril beyond your power to overcome, speak my name to the wind and the sea. Somewhere in the wide world, dragons will hear and remember." With that, both dragons took to the sky, circling once over the village before disappearing into the eternal blue. Tormund stood on the beach, surrounded by his family and neighbors, watching until even their silhouettes vanished beyond the horizon. Years flowed by like the tide, and Tormund Ironbeard became a legend in his own lifetime. Travelers came from distant lands to hear the tale of the Viking who rode Dragonback and helped save the realm from ancient evil. His story was told in royal halls and humble cottages alike, growing grander with each telling. But in the quiet moments when storms drove waves against the shore and the wind howled through the village streets, the old ones would sometimes see shapes moving in the clouds. "Dragons," they whispered, keeping their ancient promise and watching over the descendants of those who had shown kindness to a wounded hatchling so many years ago. Tormund lived to see his grandchildren born, and when his time finally came to join his ancestors in Valhalla, it was said that a great dragon landed on the beach to pay its respects. Though none dared approach close enough to confirm the tale, the massive tracks left in the sand remained for weeks, proof that some friendships transcend the boundaries between species and endure beyond the span of mortal life. And in the depths of the North Sea, where the water runs deepest and coldest, dragon song still echoes on quiet nights, carrying messages of honor, loyalty, and the eternal bonds forged between those who choose compassion over conquest, mercy over glory. The debt had been paid in full, but the friendship would last forever. Don't forget to subscribe for more incredible Viking tales. Like this video if you enjoyed Tormund and Ember's amazing journey, and comment below telling us where you're watching from. What would you do if you found a baby dragon? Let us know your thoughts.